Section 1 of Kidnapped in London. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Matthew McNaughton. Kidnapped in London by Sun Yat-sen, Section 1. Preface. My recent detention in the Chinese Legation, 49 Portland Place, London, has excited so much interest, has brought me so many friends, and has raised so many legal, technical, and international points of law, that I feel I should be failing in my duty did I not place on public record all the circumstances connected with the historical event. I must beg the indulgence of all readers for my shortcomings in English composition, and confess that, had it not been for the help rendered by a good friend who transcribed my thoughts, I could never have ventured to appear as the author of an English book. Sun Yat-sen, London, 1897. End of preface. Chapter 1. The Imbroglio. When, in 1892, I settled in Macau, a small island near the mouth of the Canton River, to practice medicine, I little dreamt that in 4 years' time I should find myself a prisoner in the Chinese Legation in London, and the unwitting cause of a political sensation which culminated in the active interference of the British government to procure my release. It was in that year, however, and at Macau, that my first acquaintance was made with political life, and there began the part of my career which has been the means of bringing my name so prominently before the British people. I had been studying medicine during the year 1886 in Canton at the Anglo-American Mission under the direction of the venerable Dr. Kerr, when in 1887 I heard of the opening of a college of medicine at Hong Kong, and determined immediately to avail myself of the advantages it offered. After 5 years' study, 1887 to 1892, I obtained the diploma entitling me to style myself Licentiate in Medicine and Surgery, Hong Kong. Macau has belonged to Portugal for 360 years, but although the government is Europeanized, the inhabitants are mostly Chinese, and the section of the population which styles itself Portuguese consists really of Eurasians of several inbred generations. In my newly selected home I found the Chinese authorities of the native hospital willing to help me forward in the matter of affording me opportunities to practice European medicine and surgery. They placed a ward at my disposal, supplied me with drugs and appliances from London, and granted me every privilege whereby to secure my introduction amongst them on a fair footing. This event deserves special notice as marking a new and significant departure in China, for never before had the board of directors of any Chinese hospital throughout the length and breadth of the great empire given any direct official encouragement to Western medicine. Many patients, more especially surgical cases, came to my wards, and I had the opportunity of performing several of the major operations before the directors. On the other hand, I had difficulty from the first with the Portuguese authorities. It was not the obstructive ignorance of the East, but the jealousy of the West, which stepped in to thwart my progress. The law of Portugal forbids the practice of medicine within Portuguese territory by any one who is not possessed of a Portuguese diploma obtainable only in Europe. Under this rule the Portuguese doctors took refuge and fought my claims to practice. They first forbade me to practice amongst, or prescribe for, Portuguese. The dispensers in the pharmacies were not allowed to dispense prescriptions from the pen of a doctor of any alien nationality. Consequently, my progress was hampered from the first. After futile attempts to establish myself in Macau, and at considerable pecuniary loss, for I had settled down, little dreaming of opposition, I was induced to go to Canton. It was in Macau that I first learned of the existence of a political movement which I might best describe as the formation of a, quote, young China, end quote, party. Its objects were so wise, so modest, and so hopeful that my sympathies were at once enlisted in its behalf, and I believed I was doing my best to further the interests of my country by joining it. The idea was to bring about a peaceful reformation, and we hoped, by forwarding modest schemes of reform to the throne, to initiate a form of government more consistent with modern requirements. The prime essence of the movement was the establishment of a form of constitutional government to supplement the old-fashioned, corrupt, and worn-out system under which China is groaning. It is unnecessary to enter into details as to what form of rule obtains in China at present. It may be summed up, however, in a few words. The people have no say whatever in the management of imperial, national, or even municipal affairs. The mandarins, or local magistrates, have full power of adjudication, from which there is no appeal. Their word is law, and they have full scope to practice their machinations with complete irresponsibility, and every officer may fatten himself with impunity. Extortion by officials is an institution. It is the condition on which they take office, and it is only when the bleeder is a bungler that the government steps in with pretended benevolence to ameliorate, but more often to complete, the depletion. English readers are probably unaware of the smallness of the established salaries of provincial magnates. They will scarcely credit that the viceroy of, say, Canton, ruling a country with a population larger than that of Great Britain, is allowed as his legal salary the paltry sum of £60 a year, so that in order to live and maintain himself in office, accumulating fabulous riches the while, he resorts to extortion and the selling of justice. So-called education and the results of examinations are the one means of obtaining official notice. Granted that a young scholar gains distinction, he proceeds to seek public employment, and, by bribing the Peking authorities, an official post is hoped for. Once obtained, as he cannot live on his salary, perhaps he even pays so much annually for his post, license to squeeze is the result. And the man must be stupid indeed who cannot, when backed up by government, make himself rich enough to buy a still higher post in a few years. With advancement comes increased license and additional facility for self-enrichment, so that the cleverest squeezer ultimately can obtain money enough to purchase the highest positions. This official thief, with his mind warped by his mode of life, is the ultimate authority in all matters of social, political, and criminal life. It is a feudal system, an imperium in imperio, an unjust autocracy which thrives by its own rottenness. But this system of fattening on the public vitals, the selling of power, is the chief means by which the Manchu dynasty continues to exist. With this legalized corruption stamped as the highest ideal of government, who can wonder at the existence of a strong undercurrent of dissatisfaction among the people? The masses of China, although kept officially in ignorance of what is going on in the world around them, are anything but a stupid people. All European authorities on this matter state that the latent intellectual ability of the Chinese is considerable, and many place it even above that of the masses in any other country, European or Asiatic. Books on politics are not allowed. Daily newspapers are prohibited in China. The world around, its people and politics are shut out, while no one below the grade of a mandarin of the 7th rank is allowed to read Chinese geography, far less foreign. The laws of the present dynasty are not for public reading. They are known only to the highest officials. The reading of books on military subjects is, in common with that of other prohibited matter, not only forbidden, but is even punishable by death. No one is allowed, on pain of death, to invent anything new, or to make known any new discovery. In this way are the people kept in darkness, while the government doles out to them what scraps of information it finds will suit its own ends. The so-called literati of China are allowed to study only the Chinese classics and the commentaries thereon. These consist of the writings of ancient philosophers, the works of Confucius and others. But of even these, all parts relating to the criticism of their superiors are carefully expunged, and only those parts are published for public reading which teach obedience to authorities as the essence of all instruction. In this way is China ruled, or rather misruled, namely by the enforcement of blind obedience to all existing laws and formalities. To keep the masses in ignorance is the constant endeavor of Chinese rule. In this way it happened that during the last Japanese incursion, absolutely nothing was known of the war by the masses of China in parts other than those where the campaign was actually waged. Not only did the people a short way inland never hear of the war, but the masses had never even heard of a people called Japanese. And even where the whisper had been echoed, it was discussed as being a, quote, rebellion of the foreign man. With this incubus hanging over her, China has no chance of reform except it come from the throne. And it was to induce the throne to modify this pernicious state of things that the Young China Party was formed, hoping that the Peking authorities, by their more extended contact during recent years with foreign diplomatists, might have learned something of constitutional rule, and might be willing to aid the people in throwing off their deplorable ignorance. I ventured, with others, to approach them, beseeching them, in all humility, to move in this direction for the welfare of China. These petitions only resulted in the infliction of many rigorous punishments. We had seized the moment when the Japanese were threatening Peking, and the emperor, fearing that harsh dealings with the reformers might alienate many of his people, took no notice of them until peace was assured. Then an edict was issued denouncing the petitioners and commanding the immediate cessation of all suggestions of reform. Finding the door closed to mild means, we grew more concrete in our notions and demands, and gradually came to see that some degree of coercion would be necessary. In all quarters we found supporters. The better classes were dissatisfied with the behavior of our armies and fleets, and knew that corruption in its worst forms was the cause of their failure. This feeling was not confined to one locality, but was widespread and deep-rooted, and promised to take shape and find expression in decided action. The headquarters of the Young China Party was really in Shanghai, but the scene of action was to be laid in Canton. The party was aided in its course by one or two circumstances. First among these was the existence of discontented soldiery. 3/4 of the Cantonese contingent were disbanded when the war in the north had ceased in 1895. This set loose a number of idle, lawless men, and the small section of their comrades who were retained in service were no better pleased than those dismissed. Either disband all or retain all was their cry, but the authorities were deaf to the remonstrance. The Reform Party at once enlisted the sympathies of these men in their cause, and so gained numerical strength to their military resources. Another chance coincidence hastened events. For some reason or other, a body of police, discarding their uniform, set to work to loot and plunder a section of the city. After an hour or two the inhabitants rose, and, obtaining mastery of the quondam police, shut some half-dozen of the ringleaders up in their guild hall. The superintendent of the official police then sent out a force to release the marauders, and proceeded forthwith to plunder the guild hall itself. A meeting of the inhabitants was immediately held, and a deputation of 1,000 men sent to the governor's residence to appeal against the action of the police. The authorities, however, told the deputation that such a proceeding was tantamount to a rebellion, and that they had no right to threaten their superiors. They thereupon arrested the ringleaders of the deputation and sent the others about their business. The discontents soon became disaffected, and the Young China Party making advances, they readily joined the reformers. Yet a third and a fourth incident helped to swell their ranks. The Viceroy, Li Hanchang, brother of the famous Viceroy Li, put a fixed tariff on all official posts throughout his two provinces, Guangdong and Guangxi. This was an innovation which meant a further squeeze of the people, as the officials, of course, made the people pay to indemnify them for their extra payments. The fourth, and the most characteristically Chinese method of extortion was afforded in the occasion of the Viceroy's birthday. The officials in his provinces combined to give their master a present, and collected money to the amount of 1,000,000 taels, about £200,000. Of course the officials took the money from the richer merchants in the usual way, by threats, by promises, and by blackmailing. A follower of Li Hanchang, Chi Fa Nung by name, further angered all the literati by selling, to all who could afford to pay, diplomas of graduation for 3,000 taels, about £500 each. The richer men and the literati became thereby disaffected and threw in their lot with Young China. In this way, the reform movement acquired great strength and coherence and widespread influence, and brought matters all too soon to a climax. The plan was to capture the city of Canton and depose the authorities, taking them by surprise and securing them in as quiet a way as possible, or at any rate without bloodshed. To ensure a complete coup, it was considered necessary to bring an overwhelming force to bear. Consequently, 2 bodies of men were employed, one in Swatow and the other from the banks of the West River. These places were fixed upon, as the Swatow men, for instance, were totally ignorant of the Cantonese language. Although only 180 miles north of Canton, the language of Swatow differs as much from that of Canton as English does from Italian. It was deemed wise to bring strangers in, as they were more likely to be staunch to the cause, since they could not communicate with, and therefore could not be tampered with by, Cantonese men. Nor would it be safe for them to disband or desert, as they would be known as strangers, and suspicion would at once fall on them were they found in Canton after the disturbance. It was arranged that on a certain day in October 1895, these men should march across country, one body from the southwest, the other from the northeast, towards Canton. All proceeded satisfactorily, and they commenced their advance. Frequent meetings of the Committee of Reformers were held, and arms, ammunition, and dynamite were accumulated at the headquarters. The soldiers advancing across the country were to be still further strengthened by a contingent of 400 men from Hong Kong. The day for the assemblage came, and the southern men were halted within 4 hours' march of the city. A guard of 100 men, fully armed, was stationed around the committee in their guild. Runners, some 30 in number, were dispatched to the disaffected over the city to be ready for the following morning. Whilst the conspirators sat within their hall, a telegram was received to the effect that the advancing soldiers had been stayed in their progress, and the reform movement forthwith became disconcerted. It was impossible to recall the messengers, and others could not be found who knew where the disaffected were resident. Further news came to hand, rendering it impossible to proceed, and the cry arose, "Sauve qui peut!" Reader's note: run for your lives. A general stampede followed, papers were burnt, arms hidden, and telegrams dispatched to Hong Kong to stop the contingent from that place. The telegram to the Hong Kong agent, however, only reached him after all his men had been got on board a steamer, which also carried many barrels of revolvers. Instead of dismissing the men, as he should have done, he allowed them to proceed, and they landed on the wharf of Canton only to find themselves placed under arrest. The leaders in Canton fled, some one way, some another, I myself, after several hairbreadth escapes, getting on board a steam launch in which I sailed to Macau. Remaining there for 24 hours only, I proceeded to Hong Kong, where, after calling on some friends, I sought my old teacher and friend, Mr. James Cantlie. Having informed him that I was in trouble through having offended the Cantonese authorities, and fearing that I should be arrested and sent to Canton for execution, he advised me to consult a lawyer, which I immediately proceeded to do. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. My Capture. I did not see Mr. Cantlie again, as Mr. Dennis, who directed my steps, constrained me to get away at once. In 2 days' time I went by Japanese steamer to Kobe, whence, after a few days' stay, I proceeded to Yokohama. There I changed my Chinese attire for a European costume a la Japanese. I removed my queue, allowed my hair to grow naturally, and cultivated my mustache. In a few days I sailed from Yokohama for the Hawaiian Islands, and there took up my quarters in the town of Honolulu, where I had many relations, friends, and well-wishers. Wherever I went, whether in Japan, Honolulu, or America, I found all intelligent Chinese imbued with the spirit of reform and eager to obtain a form of representative government for their native land. Whilst walking in the streets of Honolulu, I met Mr. and Mrs. Cantlie and family, who were then on their way to England. They did not at first recognize me in my European dress, and their Japanese nurse at once addressed me in the Japanese language, taking me for a countryman. This happened frequently, Japanese everywhere at first taking me for one of themselves and only finding their mistake when they spoke to me. I left Honolulu in June 1896 for San Francisco, where I remained for a month before proceeding eastward. There I met many of my countrymen and was well received by them. I spent 3 months in America and came to Liverpool by the SS Majestic. In New York I was advised to beware the Chinese minister to the United States, as he is a Manchurian and has but little sympathy with Chinese generally, and a reformer in particular. On October 1st, 1896, I arrived in London and put up at Haxall's Hotel in the Strand. I went next day to Mr. Cantlie's at 46 Devonshire Street, Portland Place West, where I received a hearty welcome from my old friend and his wife. Lodgings were found for me at 8 Gray's Inn Place, Gray's Inn, Holborn. Henceforward I proceeded to settle down, to enjoy my stay in London, and to become acquainted with the many sights, the museums, and the historical relics in this, the very centre of the universe. What impressed me, a Chinaman, most was the enormous vehicular traffic, the endless and unceasing stream of omnibuses, cabs, carriages, wagons, and wheeled conveyances of humbler character which held the streets. The wonderful way in which the police controlled and directed the traffic, and the good humor of the people. The foot passengers are, of course, many, but they are not in such crowds as we find in Chinese streets. For one thing, our streets are much narrower, being, in fact, mere alleys, and, in the second place, all our goods are conveyed by human carriage, everything being slung from a bamboo pole carried across the shoulders. Yet even in the wide streets of Hong Kong our foot-passenger traffic is in swarms. I was just beginning to know Holborn from the Strand and Oxford Circus from Piccadilly Circus when I was deprived of my liberty in the fashion so fully described by the public press of the country. I had been frequently at Mr. Cantlie's, almost daily in fact, and spent most of my time in his study. One day at luncheon he alluded to the Chinese Legation being in the neighborhood, and jokingly suggested that I might go round and call there, whereat his wife remarked, "You had better not. Don't you go near it. They'll catch you and ship you off to China." We all enjoyed a good laugh over the remark, little knowing how true the womanly instinct was, and how soon we were to experience the reality. While dining one evening at Dr. Manson's, whom I had also known in Hong Kong as my teacher in medicine, I was jokingly advised by him also to keep away from the Chinese Legation. I was well warned, therefore, but as I did not know where the legation was, the warning was of little use. I knew that to get to Devonshire Street I had to get off the omnibus at Oxford Circus, and from thence go straight north up a wide street, till I found the name Devonshire on the corner house. That was the extent of my knowledge of the locality at this time. On Sunday morning, October 11th, at almost 10:30, I was walking towards Devonshire Street, hoping to be in time to go to church with the doctor and his family, when a Chinaman approached in a surreptitious manner from behind and asked, in English, whether I was Japanese or Chinese. I replied, "I am Chinese." He then inquired from what province I came, and when I told him I was from Canton, he said, "We are countrymen and speak the same language. I am from Canton." It should be observed that English, or pidgin, that is, business English, is the common language between Chinamen from different localities. A Swatow and a Cantonese merchant, although their towns are but 180 miles apart, less than the distance between London and Liverpool, may be entirely ignorant of each other's spoken language. The written language is the same all over China, but the written and spoken languages are totally different, and the spoken languages are many. A Swatow merchant, therefore, doing business in Hong Kong with a Cantonese man, speaks English, but writes in the common language of China. While upon this subject it may be well to state that the Japanese written language is the same in its characters as that used by the Chinese, so that a Chinaman and a Japanese, when they meet, although having no spoken words in common, can figure to each other on the ground or on paper, and frequently make imaginary figures on one hand with the forefinger of the other, to their mutual understanding. My would-be Chinese friend, therefore, addressed me in English until he found my dialect. We then conversed in the Cantonese dialect. Whilst he was talking, we were slowly advancing along the street, and presently a second Chinaman joined us, so that I had now one on each side. They pressed me to go into their, quote, lodgings and enjoy a smoke and chat with them. I gently demurred, and we stopped on the pavement. A third Chinaman now appeared, and my first acquaintance left us. The two who remained further pressed me to accompany them, and I was gradually, and in a seemingly friendly manner, led to the upper edge of the pavement, when the door of an adjacent house suddenly opened, and I was half jokingly and half persistently compelled to enter by my companions, one on either side, who reinforced their entreaties by a quasi-friendly push. Suspecting nothing, for I knew not what house I was entering, I only hesitated because of my desire to get to Mr. Cantlie's in time for church, and I felt I should be too late did I delay. However, in good faith I entered, and was not a little surprised when the front door was somewhat hurriedly closed and barred behind me. All at once it flashed upon me that the house must be the Chinese Legation, thereby accounting for the number of Chinamen in Mandarin attire, and for the large size of the house, while I also recollected that the minister resided somewhere in the neighborhood of Devonshire Street, near to which I must then be. I was taken to a room on the ground floor, whilst one or two men talked to me and to each other. I was then sent upstairs, two men, one on either side, conducting and partly forcing me to ascend. I was next shown into a room on the second floor and told I was to remain there. This room, however, did not seem to satisfy my captors, as I was shortly afterwards taken to another on the third floor, with a barred window looking out to the back of the house. Here an old gentleman with white hair and beard came into the room in rather a bumptious fashion and said, "Here is China for you. You are now in China." Sitting down, he proceeded to interrogate me. Asked what my name was, I replied, "Sun." "Your name," he replied, "is Sun Wen, and we have a telegram from the Chinese minister in America informing us that you were a passenger to this country by the SS Majestic, and the minister asks me to arrest you." "What does that mean?" I inquired. To which he replied, "You have previously sent in a petition for reform to the Cantlie in Peking, asking that it be presented to the emperor. That may be considered a very good petition, but now the Cantlie want you, and therefore you are detained here until we learn what the emperor wishes us to do with you." "Can I let my friend know I am here?" I asked. "No," he replied, "but you can write to your lodging for your luggage to be sent you." On my expressing a wish to write to Dr. Manson, he provided me with pen, ink, and paper. I wrote to Dr. Manson informing him that I was confined in the Chinese Legation and asking him to tell Mr. Cantlie to get my baggage sent to me. The old gentleman, however, whom I afterwards learned to be Sir Halliday Macartney, objected to my using the word confined and asked me to substitute another. Accordingly I wrote, quote, "I am in the Chinese Legation. Please tell Mr. Cantlie to send my luggage here." He then said he did not want me to write to my friend and asked me to write to my hotel. I informed him that I was not at a hotel and that, Only Mr. Cantlie knew where I was living. It was very evident my interrogator was playing a crafty game to get hold of my effects, and more especially my papers, in the hope of finding correspondence whereby to ascertain who my Chinese accomplices or correspondents were. I handed him the letter to Dr. Manson, which he read and returned, saying, "That is all right." I put it in an envelope and gave it to Sir Halliday Macartney in all good faith that it would be delivered. End of Chapter 2. End of Section 1.